from the Harvard to the Spitfire was immense. But that was the first surprise, that you'd actually been entrusted to do this. And the second surprise was that you could actually do it. Growing confidence from the first takeoff onwards. It was kind to young and ignorant airmen.
So we each tootled off to somewhere in the middle of the country and were shown the Spitfire and said, "There it is, take it away." So that was quite amusing because you probably know that to get the undercarriage off you had to work. It didn't come up by itself. You had a lever like a brake handle and you pumped this to and fro. So when you took off, you started with your right hand on the stick and the left hand on the throttle. You shoved it forward. When you got off the ground, you had to change over and hold the stick with your left hand and pump with your right. The result was that when one went forward, the other went back. So when you saw somebody off on his first sail, inevitably, once the wheels began coming up, it would hunt up and down like this.
But even by September 1939, there were still problems to iron out. Therefore, when the air component of the British Expeditionary Force went to France within days of the declaration of war, the Spitfires stayed at home and did not see combat for a full 8 months. On May the 10th, 1940, Hitler's forces blasted into Belgium, Holland and France. The British fought back, but suffered crippling losses.
It was awful. No other word to put it. You suddenly found yourself up against enormous odds. I'll give you one example. 6 of us ran into 40 Ju-87s one day. We shot down 14 of them, and they ran off. Now, as we left, we were out of ammunition, another 150 87s came in. It was that thing. We were never overawed by the Germans. We were certainly outnumbered.
By the end of May, the British had retreated to a small pocket around the French coastal town of Dunkirk. Finally, it was the turn of the Spitfires to be tested. The next few days were difficult for the RAF. They were flying at the limit of their range, and Dowding was still trying to conserve his fighter strength for the decisive battle that lay ahead. As it was, over 2,500 sorties were flown across the Channel in 9 days, and many German aircraft were shot down while attempting to bomb and strafe the beaches around Dunkirk.
The main thing is that we were so few. When you remember how far we had to fly, because of our endurance, we didn't have long-range tanks. We could only have perhaps an hour, perhaps less, over there. And to try and keep that up in May, which is sunshine from 5:30 in the morning till, what, 10, 11 at night, how could we be there all the time?
As Britain licked her wounds, Dowding began to calculate how he would make up the severe losses suffered during the previous month. 432 Spitfires and Hurricanes had been lost, leaving Dowding with just 331 frontline fighters. Even worse was the loss of irreplaceable pilots.
Although we did suffer casualties, it was a situation where higher command could withdraw if they wanted to. Whereas if it had been the Battle of Britain, all the stops had to be pulled out all the time. And without our experience of Dunkirk, the casualties would have been very much higher. It was, see, the Germans had this experience in Spain. They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew about fighting. We were absolutely didn't know a thing. So it was just as well it was short and sharp.
We quickly learnt the Germans' tactics were good. And we'd been taught to fly World War I tactics, tight formations of Vic, to show that we were well disciplined in the air, I suppose, as much as anything. Actual fact, it was a recipe for disaster. We could have been killed, and we were, picked off. The Germans used to pick us off one by one. We weren't looking behind us. So quickly we learnt the Germans' way of weaving. So then we could always keep looking behind us. We learnt to take our collars and ties off, because we used to wear the tight Van Heusen collar and honor thing, which incidentally killed a lot of people. When they went in the sea, the collar tightened up. So we learnt that trick to take it off. Also, by taking the collar off, you could turn your neck more. That is why we learnt more and more looking behind us.
It was obvious that the ensuing Battle of Britain would be a vital encounter. Equally obvious was that the weight of the responsibility for defence would fall on fighter command, for the Luftwaffe would have to clear the skies over England before they could even contemplate invasion. To the Luftwaffe, this did not appear to be a problem. They had never lost a battle, and morale was high. Their pilots were vastly experienced, having begun their fighting in Spain some 4 years before. Since then, no opposing air force had stood a chance against them. And now, only Britain stood between them and the total domination of Europe. The Battle of Britain was a momentous period for the whole country. In particular, it was the first time that people could stand and watch dogfights in the skies above their homes. But the pilots who fought those duels were unaware of the bigger picture.
When I first went into battle, I was on a very steep learning curve. I was learning to fly the aircraft and endeavouring to learn how to shoot. And certainly on my earlier flights, someone would shout on the radio, break. That meant we were being attacked. And I broke a steep turn, left or right. And I found myself completely alone in the sky, not even an enemy aircraft in sight, let alone any of my rest of the squadron. As the war progressed, I'm talking about during the Battle of Britain now, one became more aware. And it was during this period of complete, almost ignorance of not knowing what was happening, to becoming aware, where, of course, you lost the most pilots. If you got over that steep learning curve, you stood a far better chance of survival.
Their main concern was taking on and beating the Messerschmitt Me-109, the German fighter that was their main adversary. The Me-109 was undoubtedly one of the best fighters of the war. Its two 20mm cannon packed a considerable punch and left gaping holes in the aircraft it was attacking. Small, light and aerodynamically efficient, it was powered by a ferocious fuel-injected Daimler-Benz engine that had one vital advantage over the Spitfire.
Well, then again, my own experience was that they just dove away. I don't remember having a dogfight that lasted very long, because eventually you'd get on his tail and then he'd dive away, you see. In fact, my experience of generally of 109s is that they always wanted to get away, funnily enough. They didn't want to engage. So you were either caught yourself and didn't have much option, or you had a few moments, or you caught him without being seen, or you got a shot or two and then away you went. And you'd be very lucky if you could, if you're already behind, be able to catch up. I had several occasions, full bore, going down, and sometimes occasionally getting a little bit nearer, mostly not being able to.
I've chased a few 109s. I don't know who was most frightened, he or I, but when they were heading for home, they went into a steep dive. With petrol injection, if you attempted, they had petrol injected engines. If with the Spitfire you attempted to follow them exactly the same way by pushing the stick forward, your engine cut out. And by that time, the Spitfire, the enemy was well away and out of range.
However, the Battle of Britain was not a good time for the Me-109 pilots. They were at the limit of their range, giving them at best 30 minutes of fuel to spare over Britain. To make matters worse, they were told by their commanders that they must not leave the bombers they were escorting. Bomber escort was supposed to be the role of the twin-engine Me-110s. However, it was soon obvious that they were no match for marauding RAF fighters. This meant that the 109s had to escort the escorts. But with a force which numbered almost 3,000 aircraft against a combined fighter defence in Britain of barely 900, it seemed only a matter of time before Britain would finally succumb. Hermann Goering, the Luftwaffe's commander, had, however, seriously underestimated the RAF's capabilities. While accurately assessing the total strength, they were way out on replacement figures, assuming that the rate of fighter output was well below the actual 400-plus aircraft per month. They also badly undervalued both the Spitfire and the Hurricane. But worst of all, they had no conception of the home defense organization that had been created painstakingly during the pre-war years. The key to this defense was radar. This pre-war invention had led to the establishment of a chain of radar stations around the east and south coasts of Britain, from the north of Scotland to Wales. Their role was to plot the build-up of enemy aircraft across the Channel and to give early warning of attack. Once the enemy crossed the coast, the Royal Observer Corps took up visual tracking, providing detailed information of numbers, height, and direction to Fighter Command, Group, and Sector stations.
Hostile 46, Northwest Willie Victor, 7542, Willie Victor,
September the 15th.
7542, 100 plus at 14.
Yes, Brompton. Yes, there is a major raid developing to the southeast. Height 15,000. Coming in on a bearing of 100.
This gave the squadrons time to scramble their fighters so that they could gain height and intercept the enemy aircraft.
Tea time on a Sunday. I don't know why. The Germans used to love that. Tea time, they used to mass up. We could see them forming up on their, well, our radar boys could see them and they used to tell us, oh, they're forming up now. And they used to start their bomber formations over the coast of France. We used to see them over there from our top. And then we used to finish off our tea, get near our aircraft, and we'd take off ready. And when they scramble, always use the word scramble. We used to scramble when we were told to, and told to go. In our main thing, it was over Weymouth, of all places, because that's where the Navy had its oil tanks. They don't know that, but I suppose they're taken away by now. But the Germans were always trying to hit the oil tanks. And it gave us time when I was at Exeter, before I moved to Tangmere. You had time to finish your tea, have a wash, and then get cheerfully ready to, so you're really ready for them.
The battle began with a succession of attacks against shipping in the Channel and raids against coastal targets. While waiting for Hitler's go-ahead for the main attacks, the Luftwaffe sought to probe Britain's defences and bring the Spitfires and Hurricanes to battle. This gave Dowding a difficult decision to make: defend the ships and lose fighters, or husband his resources and leave the shipping to the mercy of the Stukas. By the end of